Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Theory Forge's Revival Livecast. We are here at the same time again today, Sunday, for episode 4 of our show, and we've got with us another wonderful developer in Ombwa, and he is basically the lead content designer and the official kind of lore master of Revival, so welcome him to the show, and as always, we are going to be kind of going through some of the hot topics of the week. We're actually going to be going over the book that we kind of pushed back one week today with Call of Cthulhu. We're going to start with that pretty early on, and then we're going to talk about lore, different topics that Ombwa is the expert on, and then we're going to push into some audience questions if we can get that work in there. So we might, I was kind of a little bit behind today and didn't get the Q-bot quite ready, so we will try to grab as many of your questions as we can and get those up. But thank you guys for coming, and I'm going to pass it over to Astral Echo, and he's going to take over.
Hello everyone, welcome to another fun-filled episode of Revivalcast. So as Velux has already mentioned, we have another special guest this weekend. Pretty awesome because, again, coming from the perspective of a role player, Ombwa is in fact the small and petty god that he claims to be on the forums. So I'm really excited to have him on here. And I don't even know where to begin with this. So Ombwa, why don't we just begin with Call of Cthulhu? Talk about some of what it has to offer for the game.
Sure.
We're looking at a story that's very worldly, that embodies. It's almost the core Lovecraft experience in a way, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's not only does it sum up. Even if you haven't read Lovecraft, you've heard of Cthulhu. You've probably heard of the Call of Cthulhu. If you like Metallica, right? Because they've got at least 2 Lovecraft songs, one of which being the Call of Cthulhu, which quotes the story. But even more so, it's a kind of a core revival experience in that, unlike a lot of the other stories that are really encapsulated, the main character goes through the pieces of evidence that led him to the final, shattering truth. And while it isn't the author who's in the final story, the final, journal, it's the journal from the alert. It's the story of the survivors. He's like, and that's it, man. It still goes through all of the pieces to uncover. The guy first finds a few clues in the tablet, and he goes and investigates and talks to someone and gets a few more clues, and now he's tagged Cthulhu, knows about Cthulhu, and moves on place to place throughout the world, until he goes and sees the ageless seer on the mountain in China, and talks to him and gets some more clues, and until it culminates in the final account of there's an earthquake. These guys all mysteriously flock to the coast and get on this boat and go out there, and why there are these cultists, and it turns out because Relay has come up from the sea, and when they go to investigate it, the good guys go to investigate it, indeed Cthulhu's standing there in the water, and they have to run into him with their boat, but it's the whole culmination of a bunch of little tiny bits that builds up to the great experience that is the reward for the deep dive into the lore, so to speak.
So when you say this is sort of a core revival experience, we talk a lot about how revival is going to have these tagging systems and players who get to investigate things and talk to NPCs, and you learn new things and they adhere another tag to you. One of the things that I found interesting in the story is that, and I think this is true of a lot of Lovecraft, but not everything is actually the character's actions. It's not all the the protagonist who's actually doing these things. It's things that he's drawn to or that find him in a way.
Right.
So obviously you have that planned with their live storytelling system.
Things will, if you're looking for a certain something and it's obvious based on your player actions, we can put stuff in your way. And likewise, if you do some investigation and make some notes and maybe write a book called Astral's Encounters with Cthulhu, and you put a bunch of of good knowledge in that book, but you decide you're not going to go to sea and you're not going to go looking for that because it's not your bag anymore, or maybe something else has taken your interest. And I, a new player, pick that book up. I can get your tags, and then like the author or like the protagonist in Call of Cthulhu did, I can build on your experiences, and you did some things, and I will do more things until the culmination.
I'm glad we're talking about this. Oh, can I go? Because one of the favorite things about this story, I'm sorry, I get really excited about stories. One of my favorite things about this story is that even though there is a narrator, it reads as if you're reading newspaper clippings, and it almost is as if you're coming to the realizations yourself as the narrator is coming to them. And so I would imagine when we're doing books and we're reading things that are tagged, that's going to be a similar experience, especially since there will be no narrator to guide us through the process. So yeah, I really like that aspect. And the other thing I was wondering about this story and its integration into Revival is, in the first paragraph, it says basically that someday we'll piece together all this dissociated knowledge and that will drive us mad, and so we might go into a new dark age. And I was wondering if that was some of the inspiration behind the setting for Revival.
It absolutely. The concept of what would happen if one of these cults were actually successful, and what the repercussions of that would be, was like almost an easy win for me when I was coming up with the first, what is this world? How old is it? How can I get all of this like ancient world stuff in without just putting it on a plate and being like, well, of course it's already all discovered, just go look it up here or there or whatever. And I needed that break so that we would have an excuse to have all of this knowledge be broken and scattered and hidden for the players to put together so they can have that key experience. So yeah, totally. That was one of the reasons I chose that.
When I was reading these two books, we read Shadows Over Innsmouth first, and we read Call of Cthulhu for this week. When I was reading the two, one of the big differences that stood out to me for Call of Cthulhu was just the real global nature of it. Like, both these stories were really contrasting in that one was really local and narrowly focused, and like Call of Cthulhu was all over the place, going around the globe with different information from different locations. So I know your guys' world is not going to be like the real world. It's going to be a fictional world. So, and when I look at too, the kind of the deployment phases we have, we're starting out with this Crown's Rock, and you guys are smartly planning to expand slowly. Is there, I guess, is Crown's Rock going to be kind of like our Innsmouth experience? Like, we're going to get the local experience and then it's going to branch into more of a global thing as you guys start expanding?
That's kind of the goal, yeah. And I won't lie, there's a little bit of a technical, it's not even a hack, it's a strategy in that MMOs tend to be a lot of systems that all kind of mesh together to make the whole experience happen. And by building out this way, we get to test our theories and make sure that everything is the way we want, and that building a city this way, we've got the right steps in order, and we've already made a few tweaks in our plan so that the next city we build out completely, we will be a little more smooth. And we're kind of learning with Crown's Rock. We're getting it's not exactly R&D, it's more like these are all of our theories that we've got from our bulk of experience. Let's hope this works and try to see if this works, and if it doesn't, we'll make modifications and everything. So it's a big city, and as far as I know, there aren't any other MMOs that have built completely functional cities that are not facades, that are complete with the streets and every house in its place and everything, that way. So that's also part of why we're doing it that way. But certainly, you guys as founders will totally have, or those that are founders, I know some of you are, will have the experience of learning about the world from a very small place and having intrigues within the city and very localized concerns, and then the world will open up and you'll get the whole experience. A newbie that comes on after the world has gone live probably won't have quite the same experience unless they specifically linger in their town that they start in. You guys will, because you don't have much of a choice but to start in your house and then in the town. That's how we're rolling it out.
That's one of my favorite parts of the deployment, actually, just because, I mean, it really stood out to me in just the style that it's happening mechanically, because really, for being a game that's trying to focus on, really the immersion and getting people to kind of actually play and make contextual decisions as their character, it feels like the deployment lends itself to that. We're not going to have all the game mechanics at first. We're not going to have the combat or the wider world. We're going to have to focus on our relationships with the people in our neighborhoods and in the city itself. So I really look at that as like a fun experiment. Like, I'm excited to see how it works out, and I'm excited to be, jump in and see how other people handle this kind of new way of jumping into an MMO for the first time.
I do have to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, though. I agree with everything that Lux's the staged approach and how it really is going to let you guys refine what you're doing before worrying about building it on such a large scale. That being said, because we are going to be so focused on this local environment, what prevents it from becoming sort of a tempest in a teacup situation where, because Crowns Rock is our sole point of focus for such a long period of time before we get to explore beyond that, what prevents it from being the place where Dagon and Cthulhu and Azathoth and all these entities converge upon, and suddenly, there's more of the world out there, but Crowns Rock has already seen all of this in the time that we were in early access.
Well, of course, the storytelling team will have something to do with that, and the way that the intrigues unfold and the scope and length of things like that. I don't suppose you'll get great old ones, day one. You'd have to work at that. So there's that, and then also, that may kind of happen in a way. Everyone's locked into the walls, but the population is somewhat controlled, and we hope instead that what will happen is basically the world's largest in-game, or if anyone ever played like Forgotten Realms or AD&D and played in Greyhawk and just had a Greyhawk adventure, or in Waterdeep and had a Waterdeep adventure, like the one with the Eye of the Deep under the city, that could be encompassing in a long-term sort of campaign, and hopefully we can have that sort of gameplay, because to me that's stuff that is uncommon even in MMOs that have cities built. In like Freeport, you still go kill rats, or you go click on NPC 1, run over zone, click on NPC 2. It's not quite the same thing as a city adventure, really, even though Freeport's pretty big, and I guess Kanos is pretty big too, though I don't hang out there.
I don't hang out in Kanos either. I don't think a lot of us do. Freeport is...
I like hanging out in Freeport and getting kicked by snakes.
On the topic of Crowns Rock, then, Lovecraft has kind of a couple different flavors. Some people said, there is the New England Arkham stories, and then the dream fantasy stories, and then the cosmic stories. And when we suggested Shadow over Innsmouth for the story to read relating to Crowns Rock, I remember you said that was a good pick, and that's kind of the more New England flavor. So then could we maybe expect that flavor for Crowns Rock, and maybe the other cities will explore other aspects?
Yeah, very much. In fact, some of the concepts that I have for the Anakothan buildings are way more Dreamlandsy, and the Dreamlands, of course, is a whole different place. But I think that in both Crowns Rock and in another city, Tide's End, you'll have the New England fishing village sort of thing. Because Crowns Rock feels almost more like England, and Tide's End is really going to be very much more like New England with rickety old world. It's the fishing hub kind of. So, both of those will be more of your fishing village, New England, misty, rainy experiences, and then elsewhere in the world we have I've got a city that would be at home in some of the Dream Chronicles, though it's here in the world, and then some of the Anakothan stuff likewise is that way. And then we have a city that's up in the woods, and that's going to draw way more on kind of the time that I've spent living in, Oregon, the Pacific Northwest or whatever, and in the deep forest, because there's a lot of creep in that too. That I think translates very well. So, and Hyperborean forests. That's what that is. So little all of that.
But when you say creep, we're not talking cryptos like Sasquatch or something, sort of like what the Secret World was going for. I mean, you guys have stated that
not really.
you want your world to be normal so that the abnormal is emphasized.
Exactly that. Yeah, that's very true. I wasn't thinking Sasquatch, no. Bears, very large bears.
Right. So, let me ask you this. If we're talking about a world where things are normal, what's the average life of a person? I mean, they're not going to go out and hunt, their 10 decaying skeletons.
You'd have to find them, and skeletons are not, they're not verboten. They certainly exist in a lot of the Mythos tales, even undead in some cases, if you go to the extended Mythos, which I do for flavor here and there. But, we were discussing this in the revival the revival stream we did yesterday. If you wanted to be an undead hunter, you would have to probably travel around quite a bit and find where this was happening, and this would either be made to happen by NPC actions or by player actions. I'm sure there's going to be necromancers out there, and then in addition to that, the storytelling team will note you're that kind of guy. And if they know there's a necromancer in the world who's gaining kind of a lot of power, they'll point you at him. They'll give you a clue. They'll be like, I want you to go find a necromancer like this guy. Maybe a stream of clues, because that's more fun.
Now, are we talking an NPC player necromancer?
Well, if there isn't one, and you really want one, I might put one in there. Or I might tell a player to do it. There's multiple ways we can do that. We could make the NPC necromancer that only exists for 2 weeks, but it's one of us, and what we do is go bring other people into the fold and mentor them in the ways of necromancy, and then pass on to the beyond in some, spectacular way that makes them now, agents, more or less, of our power, even though they're just playing the game. They've learned a new power, it's necromancy, it's cool, they're using it, and they feel like they're the only ones who can use it because they're, maybe we only chose 5, whatevs, and then we go find the paragons of good, and we go, hey, did you know, when we appear to them as something else, or we give them a book, or we deliver to them a letter, or, put it in the newspaper, see what happens.
Okay, I'm just in euphoria right now, so someone else is going to have to take this over.
It's really powerful, just the storytelling feature. I mean, like, the way that you guys can do, as emergent AI is kind of changing and becoming new, there are going to be more ways for, you guys to even do that stuff with the NPCs, but really, like, the gold servers and the storytelling team is going to be really game-changing as far as creating the immersion, just because of that power to actually pick out players and use the players to, point people around and provide the gameplay a certain player has shown interest in. And I really, above everything, I really love the underpinnings and having your guys' tagging system, because that to me is like kind of the key enabler. And I've seen a lot of other games kind of like hint at tagging systems, but not necessarily for the use of knowledge. A lot of them use tags to kind of like create ability interactions, but your guys is the first game that I've seen that use it for a knowledge system for gating. So that is really intriguing.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's really empowering as well. And it's, as you said, sort of a key underpinning in that it's what allows us to keep track of what you've been doing. It's like, to wax metaphysical, it's like the little grains of karma that a Jain follower, believer in Jainism would think of. Everything you do accumulates on your soul in this way. Well, it does, and I can read a player and look at them and see what they've been doing by these tags that have been hung on them, or the more permanent effects of flags, and together with your overall karma score and what's in your bag, and I can even just watch you for 15 minutes, look at these other things, and be like, okay, you're this kind of person, you're looking for this. And if you shine particularly brightly on your server, i.e., you've done enough things that we note you at a regular, God, that guy, you're just more likely to have attention. because that's going to happen. And we're looking at the world on a weekly sort of basis to do these things. 3 weeks ahead of time is the goal, once the game's live and running, so that we have, basically the equivalent of a Hollywood writer's room's ability to react to what's going on our server in the same way that a period serial would be reacting to what was on the news that week, so that it could get it into the storyline and make it cool, so that we should be able to be really reactive. And it's a win for us if we can get you guys to create more of the content than more of the actual real pithy content than the Skyrim-y stuff that we're throwing in there to keep everyone else occupied, and you when you're bored.
So, what sort of, do you make a distinction when you're talking about involving players? Obviously, you have your players who are just there for the event, who want to get involved, who want to kill things, or want to, cause a war or something, not for necessarily a story reason, just because they as players like to mess with things. And then you have your role players. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, fine. I think that we'll have a lot of people who just don't even consider the possible scope. So, like, if you guys play tabletop games, and you've got a person who's played a lot of WoW, but they've never played Dungeons & Dragons, and they sit down at your table, you have to kind of teach them that there's much wider agency, and that you don't, activate your diplomacy skill. You go, my guy has a high diplomacy score. That means I'm probably good at talking to people. You don't walk up and go, I choose diplomacy, and it has this effect. It's not the same sort of thing. So I think we'll have a lot of people who come into the game from a series of games. WoW really opened people's eyes to MMOs at all, and Guild Wars has a huge following as well. So we'll get people who come over from this sort of game, and they'll be like, well, how do I mine for XPs? You'll be like, well, you have to do stuff. And they'll be like, how do I mine for gold? I'm broke, and I went out and killed a bear, and the bear didn't drop gold, and what the hell? So we'll have people that have to be taught to play, that way.
Would you say that your game kind of built for the tabletop play? I mean, I think there's a lot of tabletop players out there, and I mean, Dungeons and Dragons is arguably like the creator of modern high fantasy gaming. So, do you guys feel like your game is kind of this answer to giving a graphical experience to those people who have been playing tabletops for years?
I certainly, it was one of both Snipe Hunter and my goals to bring role playing into the so-called MMORPG category. One of the biggest complaints a lot of people have that are friends of mine that play tabletop and don't play MMOs, or they're like, oh, you do video games? When I'm at a game convention or whatever, it's that there is no role play in those unless you really force it. And we've even seen it in our forums. People talk about that. Well, how do I RP? Sometimes it feels really forced, and I feel goofy putting on a mask, and being forsooth, pray tell, where dost thou find thy XPs? It's a little weird. So yeah, we do want people to be able to roleplay, and in this way, hopefully, I've said it a few times, but hopefully in Revival, you don't have to be weird. You can just make your guy and be like, no, I'm this sort of guy, I'm a blacksmith, and by playing the game and getting your iron and working with other players to get your materials and then smithing and then selling or whatever, you are role-playing. You're doing your guy's thing. And if you're whatever, if you're the zombie hunter, then you walk around and go, hey, anyone heard anything about zombies? And they go, well, here's a book, or yeah, over there, or and you're role-playing just by being the guy that you are. So hopefully we can kind of again teach that to people who didn't understand it, and give it to people who are like, I don't play MMOs because there's no real role-playing in them.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is something that we actually touched on in our first episode, but to expand on that, when you say that it's awkward to put on this mask and become this character, even I, as someone who's been role-playing in MMOs for what year is it, 2015, so 13, 14 years now, even now in today's MMOs, incredibly awkward to try and roleplay in a world where you have no impact, and all the stories that you're telling are basically these, I don't want to say lies. Wow, okay, yeah.
Tall tales.
Jinx, you buy me a Coke.
Yeah.
No, that's what they are. They're lies. You're looking at a world where you have no impact, where you have to pretend. I've seen people who will go to areas where there are dedicated quests or there are dedicated dungeons or whatever. And because you can only do so much within those environments, I think we lost Cessa, so hopefully she'll get back. But you can only do so much in those environments, and as a result, you have players who literally force these stories on them. They'll take an inn and they'll turn it into a dungeon, or they'll take a dungeon and they'll turn it into, okay, well, it's not really, the Flame Legion that we're fighting, it's my own invented enemies who you're not really going to see them, but you can kind of pretend they're there. And, that's all well and good, and I'm all for suspension of disbelief, but holy fucking shit, I have no other explanation. I'm sorry, that's the exclamation that I have to go to. Are you kidding me? Like, this isn't roleplay. This isn't interacting with anything. It's fiction. It's creating a story that isn't interacting with the world. It's just taking something and whatever you think makes sense, putting it in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And their names conflict, and all that stuff isn't really the same. I mean, with friends you can do some stuff that's really just, like you said, has no impact on the world. My wife and I were married in EQ2 and had a little ring, and that was cool. But there was no impact elsewise, and we want to change that. We would rather that if you've really pissed off this lord or this power, that it throws things at you, and if people get caught in the sideline or the after blast or whatever, hopefully that draws them into your story, and hopefully that makes their experience more exciting. So I played Ultima Online, for example, and one day Ultima Online, I'm walking around in red robes, and they were red because I just learned how to dye things red. So wearing my red robes, and I'm running across town trying to find my friend's ship so I can get on the ship, and some dude runs up to me and he goes, "Hey, you wear the red robes of an alchemist." And I'm like, I do. They're red. I have a mortar and pestle. And he was like, "Well, I need some stuff made. Can you make it?" And I'm like, "I'm not very good. Money and stuff. You make it." And I was like, "All right." And so he wants me to make poisons, and I'm like, "That's weird. I'll make you some poisons." And I'm making them, and I make them, and I go, "Here you go. It's the best I could do." And I gave him all his poisons back, and he goes, "Thanks," and immediately takes them all, and turns green and turns poisoned. And I was like, "What?" Right? And dude's like, "Can you make me some more?" And hands me a bunch of stuff, and I'm like, "Okay." Now I'm making poisons for a suicidal, and this was a total real, like, role play emergent experience, and it was really cool. And that was the edge of what could happen, the very brink. And that was in 1999, I think. So here we are 16 years later, and we're gonna make it better than that, because that's the kind of experience I think that we're looking for.
So I cut out for a second, so I missed part of that, but I wanted to ask this question while we're talking about this, because I saw Sailkite ask it in the chat. Are there any particular MMORPGs that has inspired Revival, despite the fact that you guys are doing some really new stuff that we haven't seen before?
It would be nice if I had Snipey and Kedron on this one, because yes, I'm sure, and UO is certainly one of them for all three of us. I can say that fairly safely. And I know, it's often been said that your first MMO is always close to your heart, and I really liked Neocron and Jumpgate, and those are both sci-fi, but they are both open world to the point where, when Neocron came out, there were no quests. It was like, "Hi, there you are, you're in the city, good luck, it's scary out there," right? But it's a pretty much open PvP sci-fi. Also first-person shooter 14 years ago, so what? That one was good. In that it was an open world sandbox, do what you want to gain your personal goals, and there was a lot of RP in that game too. And while it didn't really change what was happening in the world, they had a team that was like trying to pay attention to what we were talking about and role-playing about, so that they could update just little things, placement of cops, spawns, things like that, which was pretty cool. They tried to do that living world thing, and again, that was 14 plus years ago. So yeah, Neocron's world building was good, and the way what their vision was good. How they pulled it off failed in a lot of ways, but it was my first deep dive, other than UO, and UO was also great for similar reasons. It was a massive sandbox. You could just do what you want to do. There was very little guidance. It was you're a character in the world, and it was on the path towards the virtual world thing, where you make your guy, you define some of the real basics about that guy, and then you go into the world and interact with everyone else. And even Jumpgate, which had very rudimentary there was like no role playing. There was a chat. You could role play in the chat, and you were your spaceship, and handful of stats and medals, But still, it was, you start off and it was welcome space pilot. There's the world of Galactica. Go. And it wasn't Galactica, it was their own world. But you know what I mean? It was, you're a fighter pilot, now go be a fighter pilot or a space trucker in this world of other space truckers and fighter pilots. It was a very rudimentary what Star Citizen is going to be, So all of those open world stuff inspired the open world bits of Revival. And then, as far as like the themes all come from other stuff I like. Very few MMOs have really hit the fantasy themes the way that, really on every note, the way that I like them. I like DQ2's world more than Azeroth, because Azeroth is brightly colored and really kind of dorky, goofy, and happy, fun, and has people like Harris Pilton in it. And in the end, DQ2 did too, and so I quit playing. But in the beginning, they were dark and really took their lore seriously, and that's I also appreciated that about the Conan MMO. So that's even a more modern, also inspiration. The first 20 levels of Conan, if the rest didn't fall on its face so badly.
Yeah.
It's funny. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I was.
And Skyrim, but that's not an MMO. Like, Skyrim was great. And Morrowind, man. Morrowind even more. Like, if you could put Morrowind in Skyrim's engine and then, something like that.
I think there's a mod out there for Morrowind doing that, but I'm going to admit this. I hate. I do. So, but this isn't about the Elder Scrolls. This is about Revival. And I find it funny that you mentioned Age of Conan, because this is probably what makes me, and I'm talking as someone who's bought a Mance here, so I'm in this for a Mance and another property as well, but I can't announce that one. But as someone who's invested in Revival, my biggest reservation is looking at Age of Conan and seeing similarities in what was promised back then, because Age of Conan, I think the biggest three things that really, four things. Oh my god. How much absinthe did I drink? So one would be that they actually promised a hell dimension when you died. And this was on their website leading up to their launch. And I remember reading about this, and then when I finally got into the beta, I was like, well, where's this? Why am I just respawning at a respawn point? But the idea was that, similar to Revival, that when you die, you went into this alternate dimension where you had to battle your way out and come back to the realm of the living. Awesome concept, never made it into the game. Number one fear for what's going to happen with Revival. Number two would be that enemies would, and this I think similar to, I think I mentioned some of my concerns with Rift to you guys in IRC previously, where one of the things that I always wished to see in Rift was where the enemies would actually build up their strongholds instead of just going out and taking over camps and not actually doing anything with this territory. I know that's something that you're not too thrilled about.
The game was designed to do that.
Yeah.
Rifts were not supposed to happen in the same place over and over and over. They were supposed to happen on like a table, an array of all the potential places that a rift could happen. Now it's like that one there. It's going to happen in
it's completely
like Old Faithful. Yeah,
I'm surprised. I'm sure if I look for
counter to the concept.
Yep.
So much shade. This is so funny.
It's all coming out now.
Well, what are your video game influences? Well, this and this and this, but they all suck. Ours is better.
Right. Well, I mean that's true. I mean, but yeah, Age of Conan had promised NPCs building up their fortresses or attacking your cities. Never happened. Age of Conan had their spell weaving concept, where magic in general was supposed to be this dark and powerful thing, and never happened. Their spell weaving system actually existed, but was completely garbage, and I never actually used it. And I promised a number 4, but I can't actually remember what it is. All right, I'm going to backtrack 3. I'm going to leave it at 3.
Yeah, I agree. I see it. And a lot of what we're doing is pretty ambitious, though. I've got a good idea of what it is that we're trying to do in each place, and so like the death thing is pretty integral to a couple other systems. It's going to ship that way because that's just the way it's going to be. It's just the way it's going to be, man. And spell weaving is a pretty defined system. Snipe Hunter already has the docs written up, and so we're pretty sure that magic's going to be implemented in that way. And what might change that is if it sucks. If we go in and you guys are playing with it and we're playing with it and we're like, this is really lame, we might tweak and change it in that way. But it's not just going to be like, yeah, actually that's not going to happen. That design is already written. What was the other one?
Enemies building up their strongholds. The piece about rift.
Oh yeah. So I've already designed that system. Well, sorry, Snipe designed that system. I have worked within that system, implemented that system. I know it works. I know how to make it work. It's just going to happen that way.
You've also seen that system torn from you guys and turned into a complete mess.
I have.
So I don't think you want to see that happen again.
No, I think I would burn the building down.
Yeah.
That was Office Space reference, not an actual.
I wanted to jump in. I tuned in for your guys' show yesterday, and it was a good show. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys have next week. But like my biggest number one takeaway from that show that I got yesterday was when you talked about all of you guys, Kedron and Snipe as well, that there isn't anything that you've put on the website or that you've proposed to us, the players, that said this is what we're going to do, that isn't something you guys already have, like at least a working type of prototype or something. How you're going to actually mechanically make it work with current technology. So that was like my big takeaway, because I've talked about this game to other friends and stuff, and everybody has their doubts because they've seen what other MMO companies, other studios have done. They promise something, or when they're working on R&D or they want to be innovative, they spout it, they build the hype and everything, and then turns out the R&D didn't go the way they wanted. It's something that especially for us here, all of us here on the show, we're a part of a guild that we were kind of seeding for EverQuest Next. We were kind of getting involved early in that, hoping that we could use Landmark as a springboard for things. And it feels like that game, it still can happen, but it feels like the R&D is not. The R&D is questionable with that game. Like, they're kind of playing it off of what happens, and it sounds like you guys are in a different boat. It sounds like you're working with technology that's there, or the emergent tech you have is, you haven't stated. I don't know. I guess if you could kind of talk more on that point.
Sure. I guess what we were saying yesterday, and what is true is that none of our features are pure theory. None of our features are like, well, I guess we could possibly. It's all, yeah, we could do that. We could do that by utilizing this system, or we could do that, by using this set of variables and sampling against these arrays. And it's stuff we've either done before, or that we've prototyped, or that we have 3 designs for, and all of them are. They're logical. They will work. They're decent cognates. None of them have the and a miracle appears. Part in the center. It's all very sound mechanically. So
this is
we're not promising.
Not like a Peter Molyneux, trees blooming in real time.
Oh my gosh! I can't believe you said that name. Pretend he didn't say that name. Pretend he didn't say that name on this cast.
I had to.
Sorry, Peter. Actually, it's funny. We talk about stuff like this sometimes, and I think that even though while I personally felt burned by some products, I was in love with black and white, and many years ago, and I was young, I liked Populous a lot, and so I think that in some ways, Peter Molyneux sets himself up by saying, okay, he's going to do this thing and making it seem huge, and then when he delivers that thing, and it doesn't have the same impact on his audience, they're like, oh, you screwed us. And he's like, look, the dog responds to whether you kick him or pet him. He licks your hand, I don't know. I agree. Sometimes it really blows stuff out. I felt that Fable was implied that it was going to be something so much greater than it was. But then, when my son played Fable without any of the hype beforehand, he really loved it. And so, I don't know, I'm of two minds, but poor Peter. They make such big promises.
I kind of agree with you there. Like, I enjoyed Populous. Didn't get to play Black and White. I enjoyed Fable 2, but I wasn't somebody that followed, the gaming industry at that time and paid attention to the pre-game hype. I just kind of would pick up a game and play it, and if I liked it, I liked it. So they were decent games, but yeah, I agree that hype, and it's it's the thing today too, because in MMOs you have so many factors. They're trying to sell, they need to sell to be profitable and sustainable, and so they try and build these hype trains, but it just usually does not go well. I'm glad you guys aren't necessarily doing that, taking that angle.
Not on purpose. I mean, we are making our promises, but like I said, it's all legit. I promise.
I think this is one of the things that, and this is really part of why I bought in the first place, was when I looked at Revival, and certainly things like Peter Molyneux or Age of Conan or countless other MMOs that have made promises over the years have come up, and of course this all boils up to the surface when I looked at Revival for the first time. But doing more research, digging in, seeing your guys' posts, I think what you say is that you guys actually have done this before in a fashion, and I mean you've all said that Revival. Part of the name of Revival is that you're not really doing anything new. You're doing things that have already been done before. They've already been proved out.
Or
and
talked about.
Right, and I look at your guys' posts, and they're very intelligent. They're very well thought out. You guys have your shit together. This isn't pie in the sky dreaming. This is game design.
Yeah, that's what it is, and it's a game that we've been thinking about for over a decade at this point. Snipe Hunter and I have worked together on 3 other shipping MMOs, and always worked within our constraints, etc. But I mean, with all of them, we talked about couldn't we do this and wouldn't we do that, and the game that became Rift was originally pitched in the same way. I left the company I was working at because there was this dream project, and how it turned out was how it turned out. But we've been thinking about this for a long, long time.
Awesome to hear, and I'm sure I have so many more questions about what you guys did that came out in 2013 and how far that got, but for another time. For now, we're getting to that last 15 minutes, and I definitely want to start pulling in audience questions. And I know Alexis trying to work with Qbot and making sure that all of this is working. But in the meantime, I did see one flyby that I know we sort of touched upon in IRC previously, where they were asking. The question was whether or not players could volunteer to engage with stories. And this, I'm going to reword this question a little bit because I know I mixed his name up again. Snipe actually answered this question a little bit in chat. But in terms of the actual live storytelling team, is the intention to have them be player volunteers, sort of like what EQ2 or EQ or Anarchy Online? Actually, I think Age of Conan was intending to do this, but it never happened. Or is it like true staffed, paid employees who are held accountable to what they're doing? Because I mean, you know my story with the volunteer team in Anarchy.
I do. It's the latter. It's this is a team of people that we hire, we keep in house. Everything they do is logged. They access the game world through a custom client that is for them. And yeah, we got cameras in the room, like they're very accountable. I'm a kick asses. Nobody gets to give their girlfriend the sword of 1,000 truths unless, just doesn't get to happen.
And tell me nobody gets to choose the story. Everything has to follow a logical conclusion.
Everything has to follow a logical conclusion unless I step in as a power and do something surprising, and that will be cool.
Deus Ex Machina, right? Awesome.
Right.
Let's hear it.
I do have the QBot working, I believe, so in its older form. So we will start kicking off. I've kind of been posting them so the other hosts will read, and I'll keep feeding them. So if I'm quiet, that's why. But they'll be popping them up on screen so you guys know what we're talking about too. So the first one, you guys, I have some in chat if you guys want to read those off, and I will pop it up in our window here.
Okay, I'll ask Sailkite's next question. He said, a funny one this time. Could you tell us more about the Newtonside Players Guild?
Yeah. So Newtonside is kind of a parallel to New York's like Greenwich Village or Soho, or it's where the hip kids all kind of flock to be bohemian. And so the Newtonside Players Guild is a theater, and I think it's the only theater in town that's like a regular theater, always having shows and such. And hopefully we'll be able to script little things that go on in there, and maybe at some point it'll be a theater of horror, or maybe not, or it's a theater.
All right, Nightfinger asks, will you live near noisy places like pubs and the Players Guild have disturbed sleep? Basically, will I go mad from sleep deprivation because I live next door to both of these?
I don't. That's not my current plan. One thing I really loved about Neocron is that I bought a house in the red light district. My apartment was in the red light in a bad part of town, and so in my house I can hear the club next door like coming through the walls all the time, and it's just sound effects. It's just heavy bass. It's like, oh. And if you want to get away from it, you have to go off into the other room and like close the door. So
at least the worst that you hear living next to the red light district is the music.
Right. Well, there's a little dancer out in the street, like, if I go out my front door and down there, she's in a little glass box, but you don't have to hear any of it. So, it's not in the plan to, like, hang crazy tags on you because you live next to a pub that's noisy, though we might very well model the sound effects so that when you're in your house, you'll be like, damn, they're loud.
I love that. Okay. Cersei asks, setting-wise, is Crown's Rock going to be setting-wise, is Crown's Rock going to culturally be more a melting pot, or does it have its own average culture?
Well, so there's your commoners, and that's kind of Tutory England-ish, more or less. I'm not, they won't say cheery pip necessarily, but they are going to be what they are. They'll speak Crown's Rock dialect. That said, it's a place where pilgrims and merchants tend to flow in and out. So you do get a lot of cultural exchange. It doesn't have the most. It doesn't have a big swath of all cultures for sure. It has a pretty much Crown's Rock culture, but there are little islands in there of each little sort of thing.
Do you guys have any plans for creating a city that is specifically sort of this central mercantile hub where you have, or is that something that may just develop organically in the game?
We're thinking that it'll be kind of organic, like you're saying. Like naturally, everything will start at Crown's Rock because that's our first city, and that's how that goes. But then once the flows start happening and people start, establishing the really kind of the best caravan routes or the safest caravan routes even, and the bad guys settle into sort of a bad area, or we'll always have one blue city and one red city, and that's karmic, and that's more mechanical, and so that if you drive evil out completely, those player characters who are evil won't be just kicked in the face forever every time they log in. They'll have at least an anchor point. So as those things sort of develop, because a red city could be turned blue, and we would have to find another, core hive of villainy, we expect that stuff to sort of shake out per gold server, and then we'll develop that city in that way to be its multicultural, etc., etc.
So you're going to create a tunnel between a temperate climate and a desert climate, right?
A tunnel between a temperate and a desert.
The East Commons tunnel reference, I believe. So you going there?
No, that's not. That is not how that design goes. Though there is a place in the world where there's a mountain range that separates a high desert from a low plains with a lake on it and stuff. And there might be ways through those mountains, but no, not in East Common lands.
So, I think we're actually running out of audience questions, so please, those who are watching, keep spamming us with questions, because I guess Qbot didn't pick up on more than those three, if there were more than those three. But in the meantime, since you mentioned it, and since we've sort of talked a little bit about EQN, obviously, Revival is not being built with Voxel Engine, but you're also looking at a world that is it's changing on a fairly often basis. What sort of terrain manipulation is available to us as players, or to you as the live storytelling team? If we wanted to dig a tunnel through that mountain range, what sort of options are there?
That would take work. We would have to cue to the idea that people were wanting to do something like that, and then make it possible from our end, so that we could apply the events to the server that would make it happen on your end, specifically for the terrain deformation, because we don't have live real-time terrain deformation, and we're not building a voxel world, and that's not, clearly it's not a technological obstacle, in that there are plenty of games that do things like that to one or another degree, some down to each individual voxel and some down to very specific areas that can be blown up or hacked or whatever. And I suppose we could have interactive areas where you use a shovel to interact with the rock pile, and the rock pile falls away, because it was pre-built. But we're not letting players willy-nilly affect the landscape on that scale, except by their concerted action, our noticing that concerted action and enabling it behind the scenes, so to speak. So we would get wind of your great project. We would start supplying the sorts of things you'd need to do that, and then we would begin streaming to the server, and thus to you on your client, terrain changes that we had built and tested ahead of time that we knew wouldn't jack anything up, and go from there.
Okay, I'm gonna butcher this name, but Zyphilius asks, how will wildlife work?
Okay. So wildlife will be intelligently populated, and will appear, if all goes well, to the player as though it's an ecosystem. So, like, we saw a Unreal demo the other day where there were some deer, or I think they might have been elk. They were all kind of running around in a plane, and as the camera approached them, they flocked away and ran like elk might. And so, like animals in the long dark, or in any sort of like real feel animal sim, but we won't be doing the this is a sealed ecosystem, and if a player goes and kills all the rabbits, all the bears are going to die because they're not eating rabbits, or if you go kill all the bears, the rabbits will overpopulate and the grass and corn will die, because that we don't need to have that level of simulation to give the players that experience, and it just makes more sense for us to have our hands on the dials and make sure that there's bears where we need bears or not. If you go and march through and kill all the bears, maybe we'll just be like, alright dude, no bears there. People want bear stuff, they're gonna have to go find a new bear spawn, So
will wildlife be constrained to specific zones, sort of like, we talk about games like World of Warcraft where each zone has a very specific population. Is there going to be more potential for wandering? Are there going to be, predators that hunt their prey and can actually go, say, all the elk run off into three, I don't want to say zones, but, if they travel way south, are the wolves going to pursue them?
Very likely to within limits. So, not limits on the scale of your average MMO. That's a field with a bunch of bears that only walk around within that little, and when you cross into it, you'll see what field it is, bear field. Probably not like that. And the predators will eat prey. Though again, it's not a real sim, even if it feels like one. We'll make sure that there's a right amount of things kind of in the world, and there will be wanderers as well, but wanderers are kind of special cases and do their own thing. So we will probably put a soft and hard boundary on how far a bear could wander out of the woods. So if there's a town right next to the woods, sure, I'll let that guy wander right in there, or maybe chase a rabbit into there, or a deer, whatever. Or wolves that chase deer. Like if you've played, I keep referencing Long Dark, but if you played that, the wolves chase the deer and sometimes take them down, and it's just kind of an emergent sort of thing. And if you can scare the wolf off, you can go harvest the carcass, which is pretty dope. So.
All right. Well, we actually did get nailed with a bunch of questions in that last run. We won't be able to get through all of them, so we asked a little bit late. So if you guys definitely submit them early on, we'll have them in the show, just waiting for the end time. So we'll have more of your questions and less of ours. But I did want to ask one last one for the end here. It's I believe Saranes, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Are there practices of magic that are necessarily always karmically blue or red, or does some other context to the action exist or matter?
So a short, easy answer is you can never kill a baby in a blue way. If it were a demon, but that's not baby killing. You can't punch a kitten in a way that is blue. That being said, there will likely be ways to manipulate elements that are more in line with a gray or blue god, and ways to manipulate elements that are more in line with a very red sort of power. And you can bet that things that involve taking lives and blood, sacrifice, or defiling things, that sort of stuff is probably red, and stuff that is more in tune with the forces or with nature is more likely to be blue. And then we also have a lot of neutral powers that can help you one way or the other, and then it's down to the act itself rather than the force giving you the power to do it.
Awesome. Well, we are kind of wrapping up here. We're right at about the end, so we want to for coming. It has been great having you guys here. Great questions, by the way, too. And we, of course, love having you guys on, the developers. Anytime you can come on and, help give us audience, that are eagerly waiting for the game, more of an insight into what you guys are planning is, what we're looking for. But for those of you guys who are doing kind of our book club and reading along with us, we have another one picked for next week. And I believe Ambo even picked this one kind of to give us some more insight into some game aspects that we haven't done with the books we have read with the Charnel of God, I believe, or the Charnel God. So, yeah. And that will be the next one. And other than that, I'll pass it to Astral and kind of let him close us out while I kind of change things up here and start logging us off.
Don't forget to put the link to that book in the Twitch chat. I tried to post it, and I forgot that I can't post links. So you just get that in there for everyone. But so Charnel God is actually not a Lovecraft authored book. It is, what is the name of this guy? Clark Ashton Smith. Yep. So we're breaking away from true Lovecraft and expanding into some of the other stuff that he's doing, which should be interesting because, Revival is really doing the same thing. It's taking Lovecraft and building on it and giving it its own flavor. But, we appreciate you guys coming out here. It's been a wonderful episode. Amba, thank you so much. You are so full of insight. And I wish that we could run. Could we just run for another hour? That'd be wonderful.
Thanks for coming on so much.
I need more coffee.
I need more absinthe. I'm not hallucinating enough yet. So,
Wormwood.
Right? Please tell me absinthe's going to be in Revival. That needs to happen.
Certainly some distillations of wormwood. Why not,
awesome.
Right? If you lose shit, it's even better.
Right. So, in case you guys missed it yesterday, the Revival team is actually doing their own live stream now as well. Saturday, same time as this stream, so 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Mountain Time. If anyone lives out there, Ombois, I don't.
I will be soon. Can't wait to go back. Mountain Time. Yeah, they're actually. You guys are planning to cover, possibly show some in-game footage of the Unreal 4 and the housing, right?
Yeah, I think the next one is all those guys. I don't know if they're doing it next week or if it's bi-monthly, but the next show topic is it's all the level guys, and they're going to be tripping through the houses themselves, so in engine.
Awesome. And speaking of houses, if anyone's missed it, the storefront has actually received an update. You can now see the actual locations of each of the houses as well as NPC stores in-game, as they're going to be represented in-game on that map. And so if you're curious about who your neighbors are, or if you haven't bought a house yet and you want to sort of get a better sense of where you're going to be stuck, that resource is now online, and it is pretty awesome. I'm really glad to not have any neighbors because I'm not going to say what's going to go on behind closed doors, but you don't want to know. But with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. So thanks, everyone. It was a wonderful episode, and we'll be here again next week. So see you then.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming.
See you guys.